My name is James Whitehead. I'm the CEO of JWT Thompson based here in London. It's so good to have everyone here this morning. It's so good to have so many of you here this morning. Really fantastic turnout, must be a popular topic. Few pieces of housekeeping just to begin with. I hope everyone's got coffee and tea and any other drinks that they would like. There are bathrooms around the corner. There are fire exits at the back and at the front. And if you could please keep your mobile phones on silent throughout, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much indeed. Sustainability is one of the leading topics affecting business, society, and culture at the moment. One of the biggest emerging demands from consumers today is that products and services that they purchase really need to be doing something positive for the future of our planet and for society. Just yesterday, and I pulled this out of the paper, the Chancellor himself was quoted as saying, "Clearly environmental and sustainable issues are at the very top of the agenda of the next generation of people under 30 and perhaps even people under 40. I like that addition. Almost includes me. A key part of convincing the next generation that we have a coherent strategy for managing our economy is going to be demonstrating that a market economic system is compatible with environmental and sustainable responsibility. That's why we are so keen on using the mechanisms of the market to drive environmentally sustainable behaviour. So sustainability, as we know, is an increasingly complex topic and is much more than just recycling or circularity alone. And this is why we are here today. Hopefully to enlighten us all and to enlighten business and brands as to what lies ahead when it comes to sustainability. And we believe that the new sustainability is not just a chance to transform our collective future for the better, but it's also a chance to unlock a host of really very exciting new opportunities for us all. So I'm very pleased to introduce two of JWT's consulting services and their leaders today, and their commitment to be working with clients of all shapes and sizes to inspire growth as a force for good. Marie Stafford, who leads our European division of JWT's Innovation Group, delivers futures thought leadership and consultancy to our clients. In a consumer landscape that moves faster than ever, Marie and her team are here to pinpoint the dynamic forces and trends driving disruptive changes in our lives and then translating those into actions for brands and business. She's been widely quoted as a futures expert in the press and as a regular conference speaker and panelist. She has been invited to share some of the research that you're going to see today at a number of international sustainable conferences later this year. And Meg Van Someren is the founder and global head of JWT's Canteen Consulting, our food and drink futures consultancy. With more than 20 years of strategic planning experience, primarily in food, drink, health, and wellness, she leads a team of self-proclaimed food geeks and strategists in London, Paris, and the US, working on clients big and small. Welcome.
Thank you all for being here. We're really excited about the lineup that we have. So, as Jane said, I'm Megan. I founded Canteen over a year ago, and the reason being is that we really wanted to help companies, food and drink businesses, big and small, to really behave differently, to think differently, to change their mindset from being a rote packaged good to really embrace what is happening in food culture, in drinks culture, and all of its adjacencies. So we really wanted to tap into the vibrancy and the trends and all of the things that are impacting it today. And obviously one of those major sort of drivers and topics is that of sustainability. it massively impacts what we eat and what we drink. But what you're going to hopefully see in the discussion today from the panelists, but also in the presentation that Marie is going to give, is that sustainability is a topic that permeates every aspect of our lives. And so it's one that we feel personally passionate about, and we've curated a panel of incredibly talented minds and perspectives that we're going to introduce to you guys. So here's sort of the way that the agenda is going to unfold, hopefully, is we're going to start off with Marie sharing just highlights from the Regeneration study, just to give you guys some perspective and to lay the foundation. Then we're going to invite our illustrious panel up on stage for a very quaint kind of chat. It's going to be a lot of chairs in a small amount of space. And then we'll open it up to some Q&A at the end. And then we're going to wrap with a special performance from one of our panelists. So again, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Marie to go through the Regeneration study.
2018 was the year that climate change really started to get real. The UN told us at the back end of last year that we have just under 12 years to avert climate change catastrophe. Just last week, we heard that insect populations are in dramatic decline the world over, threatening ecosystems. And as I'm sure you will have seen, the world's children are now protesting on our streets. So to steal a phrase, time's up. Sustainability as we knew it is dead, and we can't sustain something that's already broken. We need a new sustainability. But what will that look like? So the Innovation Group team has spent the best part of a year immersed in research, academic papers, innovation, patents. We've spoken to 2,000 consumers in the UK, the US, Australia and China. And we've interviewed more than 30 different experts on this topic to come up with some ideas on what that new sustainability should look like. And the key thing that we learned is that the future of sustainability lies in what we call regeneration. So this is about actively doing more, not just doing less harm. And it's about businesses and systems that have an active, positive impact to revitalise economies and communities and drive growth. And it's a model that makes sure all three can thrive together. The good news is that this is a real opportunity, as James said. First of all, this is an amazing opportunity to do something absolutely extraordinary, to shift us off that trajectory to doom, as the UN have put it, towards a much better future. But actually, compellingly, it's also a financial opportunity. And the 17 UN Sustainability Development Goals have been valued in the space of something like $12 trillion minimum. So this is a great opportunity also to tap into consumer values, right? We've seen consumer values changing really rapidly, and we've witnessed firsthand this backlash against plastic, against single-use plastics, against takeaway coffee cups. We've seen the rise in people adopting flexitarian and even vegan diets. People have a sustainability mindset now, even if they don't manage to live their values the whole time. So they're actively trying to live this way, but they know that there is more that they can do. And so that they're looking to brands really to step up and help them in the bid to become more sustainable. And business can really play an important lead in this issue. As this minister's comments suggest, governments can't, or in some cases won't, do this on their own. And businesses have some really serious advantages. They have influence, some of them have great scale, resources, but also the way they can drive innovation and shape culture. But how best to use all of these resources? So, when it comes to sustainability, I'm sure many of you in this room already know, there are no easy answers. This is a really nebulous, complex topic. But it has been said that asking the right questions can lead us to act a little bit more wisely. So what we've come up with today are 5 questions And we think that if we ask these questions of ourselves, we might find some pointers towards a better sustainability. And also it helps us explore some of the trends that we uncovered in our new Sustainability Regeneration report. So the first question is all around our impact. What do we want the impact of our business to be, or who do we want to have an impact on? And of course, as you all know, the pressure on businesses to deliver really quick financial returns these days is really kind of, driving a sort of prioritization of those models which deliver really short-term shareholder returns. But actually what we're seeing is that the voices are multiplying that are demanding a different, more sustainable approach to capitalism, one that benefits all stakeholders. As Paul Polman, the ex-CEO of Unilever, put it, one that benefits billions, not just the few. And there is actually some evidence that, that this can be a profitable model. So if you look at Unilever's Sustainable Living Brands portfolio, it grew 46% faster than the rest of their business in 2017 and drove 70% of growth. So we interviewed Afdel Aziz here. He is a consultant and author of a book called Good is the New Cool, which we highly recommend. And he told us that, a responsible business is good business in both senses of the word. And not just because it's something that consumers are looking for. So if you think about, using resources more efficiently, it will save you money. If you behave more ethically, then you won't have scandals and lawsuits which cost you money. And if you deploy equality and diversity, then you will attract the best talent. And all of these, as Afdel says, ladder up to more profit. And that's really a shift that we're seeing among some of the smartest companies, what they're trying to set up their businesses to do. And we spoke to quite a few companies who are trying to apply these to their business, lots of them kind of startups. This is Sati Kimis, and she is the founder of a business called Earth Air. It's an ethical intermediary operating in Malaysia with artisans making jewellery and accessories. And basically, she's ensuring that they get really good work, so contracts with the likes of big department stores in Europe and the US, and they're getting a fair price for their work, so they're not being exploited. And what this means is that lots of the people who work for her are now setting themselves as entrepreneurs in their own right. And so you might think, well, this is something, it's easy for small startups to do. But actually, we're seeing big multinational businesses applying these principles too. This is one of our favourite companies' case studies in the sustainability space. It's a carpet tile manufacturer called Interface. And for the last 2 decades, they've been operating towards a mission to get the business to be carbon zero. But actually, recently, they've decided to make their challenge tougher than that. And their new mission is called Climate Take Back. And it's all about reversing climate change. Right, a huge ambition for one company, setting the goal of reversing climate change, letting the planet cool. And they're aiming to do that by 2040. The idea being that they will sequester more carbon than they emit as a business. Now, what's interesting about that goal is that Interface knows it can't solve climate change on its own. But what they're aiming to do is inspire others so that those businesses that they work with, their suppliers, will come on board too. And they've made that whole mission open source, so anyone can access that from their website and apply the own principles in their own business. And the idea behind that is that by working with others, you can drive a much bigger change. So the impact on your own is minimal compared to what you can do in a system. And what our experts told us is that companies need to see themselves within the context of the system in which they operate and try to work with others in that system to have a bigger impact. And as you can see, consumers are already sold on the idea that collaboration is key to solving sustainability. So what this is going to entail is working alongside maybe governments, NGOs, community workers, suppliers, your logistics, retailers perhaps, even your competitors. But I think what this means is that the goals we have as a planet, as a species, go way beyond traditional ideas of competition. So really exciting example to share with you. This is a recycling company called TerraCycle. And they announced at Davos last month that they're going to launch a new shopping platform to pilot in the USA and France in 2019. It's called Loop, as you can see, and it basically, the idea is that consumers can now borrow packaging. So essentially you order your products, they get delivered, and then the packaging is collected, sanitized, and then reused. So we've seen models like this before on a small scale, but what's really exciting about this one is that the partners that this company has managed to sign up, they basically have a coalition of the world's biggest packaged goods companies, you know, the likes of Nestle, Unilever, P&G, the list goes on. So it's the scale of this initiative that has real potential to drive change. Another example, which we really like, comes from the fashion industry. This is called Make Fashion Circular. And we're seeing, you know, the titans of the fashion industry, from Gap to H&M to Nike, working together with producers in the sector and with designers on a collective goal of tackling the environmental impact of the fashion industry together. We're starting to see lots more initiatives like these, tackling systemic change rather than at the small business level. And our next question sort of focuses on the inside, right? We're going inside the business now and looking at the way we do business and asking, can we do the things we do better? So if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, we gave our panel a list of all 17, and we asked them to rank which one they think is the most important one for businesses to focus on. And the one they chose was goal number 12, ensure responsible consumption and production. So the one that unites businesses and consumers together in a bid to live more sustainably. And we're seeing some really interesting shifts aligned to both sides of that equation. So first one is, thank you. The first one is that we're seeing the factory reinvented. Now, so as a person who comes from the north of England, when I think of factories, I think of chimneys and belching smoke. But actually, the reality these days is that factories are becoming places where resources are being used really mindfully. The images that you're seeing here come from a company called Everlane, which is a US retailer, very big into denim. And this is their factory called Satex in Vietnam. And they're reinventing the toxic process of denim production. So by tackling their emissions, they've converted to solar energy for one. Secondly, the images you can see on the left, they now dry all of their denim with air rather than in machines. They've managed to cut their carbon emissions by 80%. And impressively, the water used in denim production is a huge amount, like 1,500 litres apparently in traditional denim production. They've managed to cut it down to 0.4 litres, which is an incredibly impressive shift. They're also repurposing their waste, so there's quite toxic byproducts from denim production. And they're taking that toxic sludge, it's being turned into bricks, and those bricks are being used for affordable housing. And things like this, they're just really the start. I had a conversation last week with a lady called Dana Baumeister, who's the founder of an organisation called Biomimicry 3.8. And they're working with a number of businesses on an initiative called Factory as a Forest. And as it sounds, the aim of that project is to imagine how nature would design a factory. So the aim is to have exactly the same impact as a forest would. So cleaning water, restoring the soil, replenishing water. Some really exciting things happening there. And on the flip side, when we think about consumption, we're also seeing some really interesting moves by brands and retailers to tackle kind of a more responsible approach to consumption and give consumers nudges in this space. And we called this trend climate positive commerce. I'm just going to share one example with you, but this is a really interesting business that's helping consumers make sustainable contribution really easily and conveniently. So it's a business called Poseidon. They're an NGO and startup, and they've come up with a concept basically where people can contribute to sustainable development through micro donations while shopping. So they did a pilot with Ben & Jerry's Scoop Shop in Soho, the ice cream shop. And the idea is you buy your ice cream and then you're asked if you want to contribute a penny to the purchase. That goes to buy carbon credits, and those carbon credits are used for reforestation projects all over the world. Interestingly enough, in the pilot, They had an incredible success rate, so people weren't just contributing a penny, they were contributing 50 pence a pound, up to £30, which I don't know how much the ice creams cost in Ben & Jerry's, but I think that's probably at least double. So incredibly smart solution, because it just doesn't ask anything more of the consumer than just doing what they ordinarily do, and a very simple choice to just say, yes, I'd like to contribute. And they're hoping to scale this solution globally, and you can see how something this would scale really fast. They're already partnering with the City of Liverpool to implement this locally there. And more than half of our panel told us they'd be interested in concepts like this that allow them to make a contribution. So our fourth question is around materials, right? And this has been the real buzz topic, I think, in sustainability over the past 12 months. And as a result, we're seeing some really exciting developments in material science as the search for alternatives to fossil fuel-derived products ramps up. The backdrop to this is obviously, heightened consumer sensitivity around plastics and packaging. 88% of people on our panel told us there's way too much plastic packaging these days. I'm sure that won't come as a surprise to anyone here. So what we're seeing is lots of natural alternatives being explored to come up with bioplastics. So things like langoustine shells, would you believe? Corn starch, potato starch, seaweeds and algae, all under investigation, and some really, really promising ideas. But the key is obviously something that can degrade harmlessly, but that also can perform well and that can be produced at scale for a reasonable cost. And what I wanted to share today is this example, which we think is really exciting because it's actually already on the shelves. So this is an edible 6-pack ring. And obviously the 6-pack ring is a real problem for marine wildlife. I'm sure you've seen them, awful photographs of turtles with them wrapped around their bodies and their necks. It gets into wildlife's stomach and can kill them. So what's great about this is it's made from the byproducts of the brewing industry. So it's kind of all done in-house. And it's actually, as you can see, edible by the turtles, completely harmless, and it biodegrades in water. And this solution is now already being tested by Corona. So there's a real big interest from the brewing industry, something that we think is going to take off really quickly. And in the future, I think we'll harness much more of nature's resources to grow the things that we need. This is a really exciting area where we're seeing designers creating advanced materials by using nature and biology with technology to come up with some really novel materials. What you're looking at here, would you believe, is an alternative to leather. It's completely vegan, and it's been grown from something called mycelium, which is the root of mushroom. So it's a mushroom organism. And this is from a company called Bolt Threads. They're collaborated with Stella McCartney, obviously a connection to the vegan line there. And what's great about this is it can be made in days, so it's a really quick process, but it's completely biodegradable and obviously zero harm to animals. And strictly speaking, meat's obviously not a material, but I think bearing in mind the emissions that we're seeing coming from the meat industry, it's worth noting that lab-grown meat looks likely to hit our shelves and restaurants sometime in 2019. We're just waiting for FDA approval on this. This is a chicken breast made by a company called Just Inc. It's created by taking cells from a chicken feather. So in future, you can be eating your chicken whilst the chicken is still happily walking around. So something to think about there. So our final question is, how can brands use the incredible scale and influence they have for more good? And I think, people want change, and there's been no greater evidence of this than what we saw in the last few days. Generation Z will be the world's biggest demographic this year, and the world's biggest demographic is seriously pissed off. They're holding the world to account. So we all saw, school strikes taking place all over the world. These things are really starting to take off, inspired by this just one girl, Greta Thunberg, 16-year-old from Sweden, who addressed world leaders at Davos last month. There's an even bigger strike coming on the 15th of March, so look out for that. But this, we say about this generation, they're the one that wants to change the world, and they might just do it. But it's not just about the kids. Obviously, we need everyone to get on board with this. And I think, one of the great things about the Blue Planet 2 documentary, which we saw last year, was the incredible impact it had really rapidly on culture and shifting people's behaviour. So much so that, we already talk about the Blue Planet effect. to describe the way that the engagement with that issue of marine pollution mobilised demand and people taking action, changing their own behaviour, also demanding change from governments. And we think brands can really help drive more of these Blue Planet style effects because they have this ability to shape culture. So to finish off, I just want to share a few examples of what that might look like. So having a powerful voice is a real benefit, and it's something that brands can use to raise awareness, build emotional engagement with issues, or to inform or to educate. So when Donald Trump said he was going to pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement, Apple responded with this film, which they aired during the NBA Finals.
The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the only home we've ever known.
I think what these images were designed to do is, in a world that's become increasingly disconnected from nature, as a population we spend 90% of our time indoors, this is reacquainting us with nature and really showing us what's at risk with climate change. The next thing that I think brands can do is help to shift perceptions. So we know people are getting on board with sustainability, but there's still those lingering issues around, it's a bit hippy-dippy, a bit crusty. So there's lots of things that brands can do to shift perceptions, to give it those additional cues that make it not just guilt-free, but potentially aspirational, innovative, or even cool. And leading with the cool is something that Adidas have done with these trainers. So these are a collaboration with Parley for the Oceans, and they're made from, I think it's 11 recycled PET bottles. Launched in 2016, but they just keep launching more and more each year. So they started off with a few pairs. I think they're doing 10 or 11 million this year. So they're selling millions of these shoes, but what's interesting is that these go for $200 a pop or upwards. So, they're not cheap. So it's not just about ethics. People aren't spending £200 on these shoes because they're good for the planet. They're doing it because they're cool as well. And I think that's something, brands can really help shape that idea that sustainability is something that we want to buy into. Just to give you an idea of how cool these things are, if you're familiar with the trading exchange StockX, there's a pair of the original launch shoes from 2016 selling for £11,500, if you're interested. The final example really is around supporting people's desire to do something. So I think, the thing is with sustainability is we know there's a problem, but, people don't know what they can do. And actually 3/4 of our panel told us really thinking about what they can do personally to make a change. And so Patagonia have come up with this really interesting idea called Patagonia Action Works, and it's a platform basically connecting their customers with grassroots projects. So, almost like a dating site for kind of sustainability, where people can donate their time, their skills, their money to the causes that they feel passionate about and where they can actually make a difference. And, while that might seem a step too far, like, why would we get that involved? Actually, it's interesting to note, 85% of our panel said they think it's really good that brands use their influence and power to raise awareness of these important issues. So, those are just some of the questions we could have asked. We probably could have asked, 10 times that number. So there's really a lot to think about. But just to finish off, I just wanted to leave you with this final thought, which comes from Ray Anderson, a business leader who's sadly no longer with us. But, what Ray says is we have a choice to harm or to help the planet. And I think maybe by focusing more on questions than rushing to solutions, maybe we can find a way to help. Thanks for listening. That's all from me. You do have the full report in your goodie bags on a sustainable bamboo USB stick. So please, dig in and feel free to come and have a chat if you're interested in these issues. We'd love to talk to you. We're going to move on to the panel now. So please enjoy a brief video while we faff about with the chairs. Thank you.
Don't let anybody tell you that we're going to get on rocket ships and live on Mars. This is our home. This is our home.
chatting shit about being a vegan. Yo, man try to say you gotta eat meat. Tell my man shut up.
Currently in the world today, there is a new wave, there is an awakening happening on the planet.
Climate change is the most pressing issue of our time.
Where youth are reclaiming the spaces in which we create change.
We are unstoppable.
This is so much bigger than being an activist. We are getting artistic, we are moving into the streets. And music is a vehicle for change. We need young artists writing the anthems for art.
impact on Earth's environment is one of the biggest challenges facing the world today. The small island nation of Palau was feeling these impacts acutely. Tourists were damaging reefs, littering oceans and poaching protected species, their careless behaviour magnified by large numbers. But how could a small local population with limited resources police the high volume of visitors? What if we made the tourists police themselves? Introducing the Palau Pledge, a first-of-its-kind immigration policy for good. All visitors now need to sign an environmental pledge to gain admittance into Palau.
I don't want you to protest, I don't want you to riot, as I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. Go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
We are now moving into the panel discussion portion, and I'm going to start by introducing our panel. And bear with me, because I am going to read this so I don't make up your bios, which I sometimes have a tendency to do. So we're going to start with James Honeyborne, multi-award winning filmmaker and creator of Blue Planet 2. Executive producer James Honeyborne, whose new production company, Freeborn, has just announced a partnership with Netflix. Thank you for coming. We have Hannah McCullum, founder and inventor of Chickpea, which is a line of sweet and savory hummus made from surplus vegetables. Having spent the last several years cooking as a private chef, Hannah wanted to change the way we look at cooking and food waste. So Hannah is a Trailblazer winner at Food Vision 2017, a finalist at the Young British Foodies Awards, and winner of Best Convenience Food Innovation Award for the World Food Innovation Awards 2016. Then we have Thea Alexander, who is co-founder of Young Foodies and runs the UK's largest community of startup food and drink businesses. Working with more than 450 businesses, Thea is able to see trends in FMCG before they hit the shelves. Her business provides support services from operations and logistics to hiring support and funding advisory. And then we've also got Marie, who obviously you were introduced to at the very beginning. And then Joel Brevet, also known by his stage name Jay Brave, a creative consultant, artist, and broadcaster. When not working with companies across media, technology, and hospitality on veganism, sustainability, and culture change, he can be found talking at schools, answering questions on panels, or performing at festivals. Joel is an ambassador for Made in Hackney, a spokesperson for the Africa Center, and a founder and contributor of VGN, a progressive online vegan news portal. So just a brief round of applause for our amazing panel. Thank you guys so much for joining. So obviously Marie has covered tons of compelling data, and there's lots more from the Regeneration study. But I think the biggest sort of headline that came out of this report and of this study is that sustainability is not enough today, that we truly are living in an era of regeneration. So I want to start off with that sort of macro topic of regeneration. And so James, I would love to start with you, especially from your experience with Blue Planet. What does that mean to you from your firsthand experience? The meaning of regeneration.
Are we living in a period of regeneration? You said we were. I was just wondering,
or we should be living in a period of regeneration.
I thought I'd missed that.
Thank you. No, that's a very, very good.
Because in 25 years of traveling around the planet filming wildlife, there's no doubt that the world's wild places and wild species are becoming fewer and far between all the time.
Yeah.
You know, we see that everywhere we go. I've filmed glaciers on 4 different continents. They're all in retreat. You know, the world is changing in a very real sense very fast. I guess we all know that, but there's so much about what's being discussed today that I don't really know, but I do know that. And we as eyewitnesses, I guess we feel we have a responsibility then to share that with the audience, and that's what we really wanted to do with Blue Planet 2. Anyway, sorry, what was the question?
What the meaning and importance of regeneration is for you?
Well, we need a healthy planet, because without it, we've lost our life support system. In Blue Planet terms, the why now, why did we want to do another series on the world's oceans? That was because we felt the health of the world's oceans was reaching a crisis point. My wife used to be a professional surfer, and I've spent many years walking up and down beaches on the west coast of Britain, and you can't walk on any beach and not see plastic. You get great big bits of, you know, marine litter from the fishing industry, but also these tiny bits that are just embedded on the beaches. They're everywhere. It's all pervasive. So when I went into Blue Planet, yeah, we knew we weren't going to turn the camera away from those things, because we wanted to give a portrait of the seas as they are today, a contemporary portrait. That it would have felt really disingenuous to have not done that. We didn't really have a choice. But the brief to the crews was go out there and tell it how it is. Because that's our job. What we didn't know was how the audience would respond. And I think what's been so edifying for us and for our team over the last year is the warmth of response from the audience. And how what we've seen, I think, is actually a human response, a response to make things better once you understand a problem that perhaps you hadn't connected with before.
Yeah.
I still haven't answered your question.
That's all right. But we're actually going to dig into that topic a little bit more as well. So that's good. You're good for now. Hannah, I would love to know, though, from your business perspective and what you're on a mission to do, what the importance of regeneration is as a concept.
Okay. I guess for my mission is educating people about food waste, eating and living more sustainably. And so I guess in terms of regeneration is making people more aware about this, because I still feel that there is so much more in terms of educating people to change their daily habits. People still, we talk about the story and food waste all the time when I'm doing events and samplings in stores, and people are still going, oh wow, yes, I should, reduce less food or change my habits when I'm ordering in restaurants. And I think it is about eating less meat, being so much more aware about the food that you waste in your home, to your purchasing habits. And even when we do tell people and all my friends and family, still I see the same habits happening again and again. And it's actually like, we know there's a problem, so are you going to make those changes? Every little bit of food that you waste in your bins to the kind of steak that you order at the restaurant when you could have had maybe something a little more sustainable like chicken or no meat. It is actually making those choices yourself and realizing that your impact does make a difference. So to be less selfish in a way, because it does affect on a larger scale.
Thank you. And Thea, I'd love to know, based on the conversations you're having with businesses, the role and how often this topic is coming up for you, which I would imagine is quite frequently.
Yeah. So we work with almost 500 startup food and drink brands, all of whom are desperate to innovate and be at the forefront of change. They are closer to the consumer than the blue chips will ever be. And I guess we've got a really simple mission at Young Foodies, which is to create a world where small brands can be mighty. And that's all about how do you make chickpea feel like Unilever. And they drive change, but the challenge is, and I guess what we're championing, is how do you make it commercially viable? And frankly, right now it's not. And I guess that drives change in the consumers' kind of decision making when they go to the shelf and one hummus is X pounds and one is 3X, because that's more sustainable, and I'm making that up, sorry. That's not going to drive change. So there's got to be a systemic, commercial, capitalistic consideration here, I think, before any real mass change that actually affects every single layer of society takes place.
Yeah.
And so I guess that where we come in, or what we try and do, is find those economies of scale and find those opportunities for innovators to do what they want to do affordably.
Yes. And we definitely want to dig into this topic of sort of sustainable capitalism and what that means. So that is coming soon. Jay, because you have just this strong emerging voice in the space, I'd love to know the importance for you and the meaning for you in terms of sustainability and regeneration.
Sure. I believe that in my capacity as a youth ambassador for Made in Hackney in particular, which is a community kitchen based in Stoke Newington charity, I have the luck, the fortune to work with so many young people, sometimes from the age of like 6 to even 11 years old. And I think while we're talking about regeneration physically, we also need to talk about regeneration ideologically. And I think that by kind of getting the conversation in with young people at a point in their development that they can begin to make choices for themselves rather than following narratives that have kind of always come and gone before, and this belief that systems have to be the way that they always were. This has been probably the most, I suppose, amazing benefit of what I get to do. And like in talking to schools, seeing how many people in young audiences actually have that kind of that light bulb like moment, especially when pointing out to them that these ideas of regeneration are definitely more about form rather than content, because people so often believe that so many of the young people that I do talk to, they believe that their career ambitions or whatever it is that they want to do is following in the lines of people that they've already seen. But what I've been able to point out to them, I think what we were hearing like Marie say in some of the talk before, was that if we can start looking at form rather than content, rather than designing t-shirts, you could be, how do we make t-shirts? How do we upgrade from like not only cotton to bamboo, but then from bamboo to other byproducts from other natural resources, stuff like eucalyptus, mushroom, there's so many other like byproducts. And so for me, regeneration is definitely be something about paradigm shifts and something to do with how we can affect the conversation from as young as possible.
Okay, great. And I think a few of you also touched upon this notion of behavior change in people. And I think, I want to talk a little bit about the sort of consumer uptake and interest. And I think from a lot of the research that Marie shared, there's a massive amount of interest. There's a massive amount of appeal and passion. But behavior doesn't always marry up. And so, Maria, I'd love for you to dig in a little bit more into that sort of gap.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a real paradox. We found like massive support, buy-in to the concept of sustainability, but in reality, the way we live doesn't always match up to that. And I think there's several reasons. One, I think first of all, we probably overstate our good behaviours, so we think we're doing more than we are. But there's also issues around availability. So as part of the report, we interviewed a young guy called Joe, who was trying to live plastic free for a month, just as a kind of test, kind of like veganuary type thing, but with plastics. And he found it virtually impossible, because if you think, you walk into your supermarket and try and buy something, it's almost impossible to avoid plastic. And, so sometimes the options just aren't there. Try and buy a sustainable toilet cleaner. It's not easy. So that's one issue. I think affordability is another issue. Sometimes the sustainable choice is not affordable. So if you think about something like hybrid cars, lots of people want to have a hybrid car, but they can't afford one. And then also, there's also kind of issues around conflict. I know that it's not sustainable to fly abroad, but I really love travelling, and how do you square those two? So I think again that goes back to people are crying out for more options, and if they're there and affordable and convenient, then I think people are ready to buy into those.
So talking about, because I think the topic of affordability is actually and access is really interesting. We see all these amazing services and products, the recycled shoes, hybrid cars, but obviously that comes at a premium price. And I think too, from a lot of the research, is that you're actually seeing that some of the most resource efficient countries are less developed. So I'm just wondering how we sort of reconcile that. And I don't know, James, from your travels, if you have perspective in terms of how you've seen sustainable living being made more accessible and affordable, or sustainable choices.
If it's not easy, if it's not convenient, and if it's not cheap, we're not going to do it. So, and I think we all struggle, don't we, in our daily lives with recycling and trying to live with, in a more sustainable way. It's just not easy enough yet. And it seems that there's, for it to become easier, we need leadership, and we need the leadership of governments, we need the leadership of industries and businesses, and that's going to be what allows this to happen. And without that, what we've noticed on Blue Planet is this great swell of public support and the sort of ground up mass movement, really, which is powerful to a point, but without the reciprocal leadership from above that allows it, facilitates it all to happen, we're not going to get there. Yeah. And I think that's just a trend you see everywhere. I am worried about not answering your question again now.
I'm giving you hard ones. Maybe that's
just going off on one. But so there. Human ingenuity is endless and boundless, and there are so many sustainable solutions to problems once we know what the problems are. Just going back to the Blue Planet example, it's really as you illustrate a problem, people respond. You don't need to tell people what to do. That wouldn't be right, and that wouldn't be the way for us to make most impact in the films we make. But if you illustrate problems and they're tangible, and people will think about them, and that's part of human nature. We all want the world to be a better place.
Bring the problem closer.
And it's about leadership and about clarity and identifying, and also identifying alternatives.
Yeah. Perfect. You did. So,
okay.
So you're getting closer.
Okay.
Hannah, I'd be curious to hear some of the conversations you probably have with your consumers and the people who love your products and your brands, which we had, I know a few in the audience here, specifically on my team. What are some of the interactions? What's some of the feedback that you get from people in terms of what you're trying to do and why you do it?
So it's nothing to do with price, or
no, just
okay.
Yeah. So
okay,
just in general, the consumer reaction.
It's been really interesting seeing the change. So started 2016, and talking about surplus vegetables then and wonky vegetables and the excess that we used to find on the farms. Like, not many people knew about it then or were interested in buying into it or anything like that. It wasn't available in the supermarkets then, and we did get questioned a lot more, and I would have to explain the story. And whereas now people are more aware, and it's the reaction is good, and people want to also go and do their bit at home as well. So for example, my pots are in plastic. Everything is recyclable. We have a cardboard sleeve and a plastic pot, and everything is reusable as well. I've never thrown away a plastic pot in my life. You can wash them, reuse them. I do a lot in food service as well, so we use the bigger tubs, repot the small ones, and use them for various events or samplings. And that is one question that I do get, is what do you do about is there any other alternative? At the moment, there actually isn't really, but I'm constantly looking out for it, and actually giving me some more ideas after saying that. But it does come from the higher up end. So one of my, I've kind of gone off on one as well now, but just to go into it quickly, I use Chickpea as a platform in a way to talk to manufacturers and larger companies who are producing plastics or who are manufacturing food, because there's a lot of food waste in manufacturing. There's also the packaging, the byproducts, and it's been amazing to be able to access those people and places by having Chickpea as a platform, especially in offices where people, well, huge offices like Amazon and Facebook, there are 3,000 people in those offices, and they're all getting fed 3 times a day, and every single plate, knife and fork, cup, plastic cup, mug is it's biodegradable apparently now, but it's all disposable, and it should be that everybody has their own crockery set, or so it's these kind of things which I do talk to people a lot about with Chickpea, and so
gives you the platform.
Gives us the platform.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. Jay, I'd love to hear from you the sort of topic of sustainability is actually becoming quite in vogue. It's becoming quite cool, and I think a lot of it is thanks to things like Blue Planet. But you know what you're doing and how you're engaging, especially with young people today. I'd love to just hear your approach and again, sort of the response that you get in engaging with people and making it part of pop culture.
Sure. I think for me, I became vegan 3 years ago now, and at the beginning of my vegan journey, I suppose I was very much learning myself, and so when people would ask, or I suppose at the beginning, I used to just volunteer it all the time, like, I'm vegan, which obviously I've learned to stop doing now. But in the beginning, I always framed it about reduction, and so in essence, the narrative was very negative. It was like, you can't have bacon anymore, you can't have this, you can't have, and so I recognized that it was off-putting to people when you open a conversation on a negative. And so I recognized that the way to make the conversation more relevant, more something that would stick with people and drive engagement, was by injecting some humor into the conversation, yet not taking yourself seriously about it, but also pointing out opportunities, pointing out like how you can make money, or how you can do good business, or how you can like widen your horizons. And so I do believe that we live now in a society which communication and business at large is so much more about horizontal networks rather than old verticals, and power being like held in small pockets. These days, I mean, I'm not sure if people know about Gary Vee, for example, online, just talking about how you can just create your own YouTube channel. You can, and the democracy of information now means that if you have a story that you want to share, you could end up sharing it with the world in one day, with the nature of things going viral. And so what I have been kind of like keen to, again, point out to those younger audiences, and something that I kind of noticed as listening to the answers from the other members of the panel, is that for people of our generation, and even the generation probably just one below us, it is about having to unlearn and relearn. But we have the opportunity with our younger people who are still in school, preschool, and even in college, to educate them correctly the first time, or to at least give them the framework to be able to not have to come to a place where you have to unlearn and face up to beliefs that you've held for a long period of time, but you can be on the right track from the beginning. And I mean, what I have learned over the years since becoming vegan, and been able to, I suppose, let down some of the walls and barriers to like, well, this is part of my culture, well, why come these people aren't doing it? And as you start to let go of some of those ideas, you do start to see everything far more from a macro perspective. You understand that even from a business perspective, looking at how we live, that we as humans are part of supply and distribution chains, and if we do not make the whole chain efficient, we're as bad as any other part of it. So I think there is, the cool cachet that has been able to come from it, but I think, I mean, again, I've also gone way off from the
That's what we're here for. This is
nah, sure. But I mean, I suppose, this is why I also try and make sure that for all performances, for everything that I do in this kind of vegan sustainable sphere, that like I kind of like represent it at every single level. For example, like the clothes I'm wearing today, my jeans are from a company called Nudies, who, if your jeans get damaged, they will just keep on refixing them. So it's a very sustainable denim company. My shoes from a company called like Will's Vegan Shoes. I have a watch made from Pinatex, which is the byproduct of pineapple leather. I would have worn it today, but my baby daughter vomited on it before I arrived. But also as well, I have a bag from a company called Matt and Nat, which, similar to the Adidas Boost trainers, which Marie was showing, is made from reclaimed sea plastic, but like looks as good as anything else like on Net-a-Porter or on the market. And so I suppose, at my heart, just to round this little speech off, is that if we can, in essence, assimilate cool ideas that exist at large, but make them become more sustainable, make them become, people just jump on board, people just love new stuff. I've always found that that the cool factor can outweigh people's consciousness, that if something's cool, they can forget all the other ideas they held and go for the cool thing. And so I think, it is largely on us as individuals to make those changes, but from a business perspective as well, to try and, I suppose, make those products or make that sustainable future come across more cool.
Perfect, thank you. And I think it's time to get into the conversation around business, because I think, the point around the leadership and the business choices, and I think it's fairly obvious today that the state of government and politicians, is requiring us to rely on the more private sector and businesses themselves and corporations to help create new solutions and to help create that change. So I want to talk about this topic of sustainable capitalism, because I think it's a really important one, and probably for many of the business leaders in this room. Thea, because you work so often with young up-and-coming startups, how do you reconcile some of these discussions with the companies that you consult with?
It's largely an impossible conversation, to be honest, at the moment. So I guess we've all spoken about how it's a systemic change required. It's something that involves so many stakeholders. You can't just be a small brand kind of deciding you want to change your whatever crisp packet to be compostable, if it can't actually be compostable in the Welsh region, or if it costs 20p more than a normal crisp packet and the consumer doesn't switch to it, so the volume's not there, so the impact isn't there. There's so many different, it's the supermarkets themselves in the food and drink world. They represent so much of the volume going through consumers' hands and houses. It's the blue chip brands, which until let's take packaging, until the packaging providers can innovate in a way that gives mass packaging, in a way that protects the shelf life and the barrier properties that normal packaging does, in a way that's affordable in the same way simple plastics are, and in a way that's gone through the kind of whole FDA or whatever the food safety process is, to the point that we can say it's safe for consumption. Until all that happens, nothing can really change behind the scenes in the brands. And if you do try to drive change and be at the forefront of it, all that happens at the moment, and it's incredibly frustrating, but all that happens is that you either you're not at an affordable price, so you can't be listed. If you do get listed, you aren't really bought because consumers aren't ready to shift and en masse spend the extra cash. So there's a big kind of fundamental shift required for any of this to actually start kind of long-term working. But I guess before we start thinking about these solutions, there's some basic kind of, excuse the pun, but low-hanging fruit stuff we could be doing that doesn't require creating a new type of bottle, doesn't require any of that. It's basic things like don't put plastic packaging around bananas. Just they've got a skin, so you don't need to do that. So, eat fruit that's in season in the UK and start shifting the consumer mindset towards more seasonal eating. It's basic stuff like that that actually we could switch quite quickly and have quite a big impact before spending money. It actually saves money at that point. And all this innovation stuff, we know that's longer term and we need to deal with that, and that requires, you know, changes in our recycling facilities, changes in our government taxes, changes in the way supermarket strategies shift, and brand changes and the innovation side and the FDA approval stuff. So that's all longer term. So there's kind of 2 points to it, if that makes sense. And I've kind of gone off on a tangent as well. But there's stuff now that you can do to save costs as a brand, reducing packaging, removing, you know, if you're a snack, taking the air out of your pack a bit so the packs are a little bit smaller. And if everyone in snacks did that, that would reduce, you know, that could take 20% out of our transport routes in the UK. That could take 20% of plastic out of the pack. That could, you know, make a huge shift immediately while not changing the fundamentals of the product. So it's about thinking that way. What can you do now? And then what, you know, waving a magic wand would I do in 2 years' time if X, Y, and Z assumptions came true?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, and absolutely. And I think what's really fascinating too is if you think about kind of the old rule book of competitive advantage and trading on that sort of, you know, superiority, seems like the change it demands collaboration. So all of a sudden it's almost for these things to happen, those so-called competitive set needs, those barriers need to be broken down and people need to come together to make that change. And so I'd be curious, you know, Hannah, for you, you know, how often do you find yourself having, you know, and I'm assuming that Thea, you see it all the time with your clients, but to kind of come together and work, you know, in harmony with so-called competitors? Do you find yourself, I mean, I think that's what's so massively admirable in the small business, especially food and drink world, is this desire to work together versus, you know, enemy competitor. Do you experience that? Do you?
Yeah, I think that you might find food industry is actually really quite small, and people are amazingly helpful and collaborative. And the other in food businesses in what we're doing, reducing waste predominantly, is about their chutney companies, juice companies, fruit snack companies. So we're not direct competitors necessarily. We're actually all kind of trying to kind of send the same message across and help the same problem, but we're not kind of going for the same farms or the same products or sitting on the same shelf. So actually we do a lot of collaborations. We talk at events together. We come together at events. We use each other's products. We help market each other. And it's amazing. And on Twitter, for example, there's constant retweets and helping each other out. And we'll also speak to each other directly. And if we want advice, everyone is very, very helpful and really happy to give each other advice and help each other on our way, because we're not all money-grabbing people. We're actually really trying to help a problem. And I would do anything to help a farm who has loads of tomatoes that need rescuing. I would point them happily in a juice company's direction and say, look, I would love to use them, but I don't have a flavour right now. These guys will hopefully. And then I'll try and market it and tell people to go and buy it as well. Yeah. So it is really something that people are very happy to share and collaborate with.
And Marie, do you have examples that you can think of at a larger scale where you're starting to see this kind of collaboration prevail in the business?
I mean, so we mentioned a couple earlier, so I think the Loop retail platform is really exciting because of the scale that it has and because of the people that are involved in it. But you know, beyond that, we've seen something like the UK Plastics Pact, which is uniting companies all across the value chain in plastics with governments, local authorities, and trying to make the plastics economy more circular. We've also seen an interesting collaboration with McDonald's and Starbucks, who are trying to come up with an alternative to the plastic coffee cups. So they're running a competition at the moment called Next Gen Cup, which is just down to its second phase. So they've shortlisted 29 companies who are all bidding to design the next iteration of the coffee cup. So it's a really interesting collaboration. And there's more like this. I think, you know, I guess it's the deadlines that these sort of initiatives are giving themselves seem quite far in the future. So, you know, I think the Plastics Pact is talking about something like 2030. And if you think we've only got 12 years,
to get the climate back on track. It maybe seems that they're well intentioned, but maybe not working fast enough. And I think probably because of all the issues that Thea has outlined, this is really, really difficult to do in one company, let alone at a sort of system or industry level. So we just need more and faster, I think.
I want to talk a little bit about sort of the new nasties of sustainability. So I think obviously plastic is in the spotlight massively right now. But what are some of those emerging enemies that you guys are seeing on the horizon? And James, I would love to, again, hear from a Blue Planet perspective. I would imagine you saw a lot. What really stood out to you as kind of what's on the horizon?
So we only had, in all 7 episodes, we only had 14 minutes on plastics in the whole of Blue Planet. So, we didn't dwell on it. We did dwell more on all the consequences of global warming. So the loss of sea ice in the Arctic, the back-to-back coral bleaching because of elevated sea temperatures, and then ocean acidification, sea level rise. These are the massive things that we should have a huge sense of urgency about. There's no, I think every generation likes to think they're living at an exciting time, but we are probably the first generation to really understand how the planet's working, and the next generation is probably the last that will be able to do something effective about it. So of all the nasties, that's the big one. But it's conceptual. Global warming's conceptual. It's not tangible like plastics. If you see a bit of plastic floating in the ocean, you can imagine how it might have got there. You might recognize it as something you use yourself, and you can probably also imagine some solution for getting it out. That's a tangible problem. But these conceptual problems, the bigger conceptual problems, those are the much trickier ones to address.
Okay. Jay, what are your thoughts on that?
I would tend to agree, but I would also say as well that we have a lot of political movements, and again, back to the idea of, or back to ideology, where we see there are, in high office, climate change deniers, and people who are trying to peel back environmental protections and seeing it almost as if this is the last hurrah of squeezing out every bit of fossil fuel money that's available, but at what cost? I mean, something that I always remember, even when looking at that final quote on the screen, is that it's not the Earth that will kill, it's humanity and animals that will kill. The planet will still be here. It's just us that won't be. And so I think one of those big enemies is that I think while also talking about how amazing the democracy of information is, it is the poison chalice as well, because there is now so much misinformation and disinformation out there. People who are believing that because you can bring a snowball indoors, that how can the Earth be warming up? And people not understanding the difference between weather and climate, for example, but then because of the nature of social media and media platforms, you can exist in an echo chamber forever, really believing your ideas and that things don't need to change and that everything's fine. So there is definitely an enemy in the over abundance of information, and while we are trying to, I suppose, individually, as groups, as businesses, make these changes, we also need to be aware of how we communicate these messages in such a way that they can stick, or that, I think more so, is we don't want to be telling people what to do. We need to be figuring ways to incept ideas that people kind of come to these conclusions of their own volition and believe that, wow, I want to be part of the solution, as opposed to always waiting for some big business or some company or your government to do it. That famous quote from I think it's Oxfam about think globally but act locally. I think that is what we all need to really to take on board if we're going to make any sustainable change.
Yeah. And Marie, I'd imagine you've got a strong point of view on this. Well, I know you do, so that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about, the big ones, I mean, I don't know what we do about willful ignorance, but there's some interesting things we've seen happening around things like, carbon, which obviously drives, carbon emissions that drive climate change, plastics, and waste, I think probably were the three that I would point to as kind of, the big enemies. But one of the interesting things we saw in our research is that, the designers are already starting to think about how we can reimagine those, so we don't think about them as demons or evil, but start to reposition them in a new light. So if you think about something like carbon, there's the X Prize going on at the moment, which is challenging companies to come up with solutions to how we can turn carbon into something valuable, profitable. So one of the trends in the report is called carbonomics, and there's companies capturing carbon from the air, turning it into things like concrete, industrial solutions, fuels even. And obviously with waste, I mean, chickpeas are a great example, but lots of companies kind of working together to use each other's byproducts and waste and turn that into something new. One of the great examples we talk about is called the Malmo Upcycling Service, and they take industrial waste, so kind of lumps of concrete, bricks, glass, turn them into like the most beautiful artifacts and products that for your home people actually want to buy. And this is stuff that previously would just sit in a skip. And then when it comes to plastic, I mean, I think it's interesting. Like there's things we really need plastic for. It's what makes aeroplanes light, what makes our cars kind of more manoeuvrable. It's something we use in the medical context, and it's going to be really hard to kind of shift away from that. But I think what some designers are starting to do is try and think of plastic differently, so reevaluate it and see as actually this is a really precious material that we should use really sparingly, not just liberally chuck it everywhere, use it once and throw it away. But yes, we need it, but let's use it in a more cautious way. So there's a really interesting designer in Holland called, I think it's Dave Hackens or Van Hackens, I can't quite remember his name, but he did an exhibit last year called Precious Plastic, where he actually made a diamond from plastic and it was exhibited. And I think, just showing that this is something we could treasure rather than see as something that's just disposable.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but I realized that I failed at one of my duties, which is to let you all know that we are going to accept some questions from you guys via Slido. So if you want to go to, tell me how long it is to give the directions? So if you go to Slido on your devices, all you have to do is enter the number, and you can ask a question. And I'm going to get a little contraption to ask some of those questions. So I'm just going to let you guys know now. My apologies. So as I ask the last couple of questions, you guys can throw a couple things out there as well via Slido. So I want to dig a little bit into the final topic, which is really in the world of food and drink specifically. Within Canteen, we conducted a study last year, and it was pretty astounding to see that a third of people in the US and the UK, nearly 40% in France, and nearly 50% in Brazil actually believe that what they eat and drink is a reflection of their political and environmental views. And I think those numbers are only going to continue to increase. So I would love to hear from you, Thea, in terms of what you believe and what you're seeing brands are doing that is positive today, and what you think they could be doing more of in the space.
So I'll start with what I believe. I believe, so the way I live my life is I really want to drive change. I really want to live this kind of, I'd love to be vegan. I'd love to switch out from plastics. I'd love to remember my coffee cup when I go to Pret, because every time I turn up, but I always forget. But what I do is try to kind of do 20% change in everything I do. So if that means switching out from eating meat at home, I try and do that as much as possible. That doesn't mean when I go out to a restaurant I'm vegan or meat-free. But I do the kind of small amount, and my firm belief is that if you ask, a room of 100 people to go vegan, one person might do it. If you ask a room of 100 people
to reduce their meat consumption by 10%, or or go plant-based 10% at the time, all of them will probably do it, and that's 10 people, not one. So I do believe in kind of being more pragmatic and not so extreme in changes. That's kind of the broader point. From the brand's point of view, we're seeing a lot of brands in food and drink go B Corp. So B Corporation, for those that don't know, is all about kind of using business as a force for good, and it's about kind of multiple bottom lines. So you're viewed not just on your profitability, but also how good you are for the world. And that's kind of, it encompasses everything from how you look after your employees, to your impact on the environment, to how your kind of end-to-end supply chain does good for the world. And it's becoming more and more popular among brands, which is an amazing thing to see. And I guess we, as much as possible, try to educate brands on how to do it and support them through that process, because it's not hard. And when you do it from the beginning of your life, it's very easy to do it in the right way. I think it's a lot harder when you're innocent and you go back at the point of being owned by Coca-Cola and try and embed it into your system. So we work with a lot of brands on that, and I think it's amazing to see so many founders starting their businesses saying, I want this to be a business done in the right way, not just for pure profitability. And I do think more and more supermarkets and consumers are responding to that. So I think there's a kind of good business intention behind it as well.
Okay.
And buyers more and more are asking about B Corp, which is always a good thing.
Okay, on the customer side.
Yeah.
What about you, James, in terms of, Joel, in terms of the concept of, I know you do a lot of consulting with vegan startups as well. What are you kind of seeing and advising?
Well, I think what Thea's saying is brilliant as well, because for a lot of people in the startup space, it's sometimes the support from organizations who can help accelerate or incubate, who share those values, that can make them believe that their business concept is even viable, beyond the fates or the farmers markets that they're doing, and that their businesses can be scalable. And so I believe that with not only food agencies, but also with some of the world's bigger accelerators and incubators, it is great to see that people are taking this kind of corporate social responsibility actually a lot more seriously. Because again, just to echo what Thea was saying, I do understand that, especially in these times of austerity and belt tightening, people are driven primarily by profit motive, and making sure that me and mine can be good for the next generation, or that they can be protected. But it really does take that kind of more mindful and compassionate outlook, that that maybe having a bit less now to make sure that there's a bit more moving forward, a bit more of a, even if it's just a midterm rather than a short-term mindset, already is working in the right direction. And so I just couldn't agree more, even as well with your point about veganism. That obviously at first when you mentioned it, I was gonna again pipe up I hope you go vegan. I'll do it. But you're right that, and again what I have learned over the time as well, is that rather than me suggesting to people overnight go vegan, which is very difficult to get to that place, it is better to say how about if you come to mine, I'll only make this, or how about, and making small decisions or small choices that actually work a long way to empower people, because it is only through the empowerment to help people make these choices and decisions for themselves that we actually get any sustainable change. Because again, people will often change literally in my eyesight, in my presence, and as soon as I'm gone, basically they're right, that was fun while he was here, but get the bacon rolls back. So I would love to just think of and so I suppose support more businesses, more ways of creating an environment, audiences which support these ideas, rather than people out there feeling like they're doing it alone. And I think that is also the key to any movement. It is that camaraderie. It is that collaborative nature that kind of makes everybody feel like they belong to something. And so, I mean, just lastly on that, I think when we have the support, I'm talking about like agencies and businesses, but it's also when the bigger financial institutions, I mean, we have a friend here from HSBC up top, and he's talking about like, you know, investments in sustainable business, but it's when things like that become more visible, so that people become aware that, okay, even like, you know, the financiers, the people who in essence are seen as like, you know, the power behind all of this influence, when people see that even they are making the changes, it makes everybody feel more inclined to push in the right direction.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to go into audience participation. And actually, one of the first questions is to the audience. So, show of hands from all of you guys, would your business function if there were a meaningful carbon tax? Yeah? Slowly more and more hands are coming up. Okay. One question too is it easier for startups to embed sustainability in their practice versus established businesses? And if so, what advice can you give to big brands that are making this jump? And I think that's a really, really important question, because I think when you are building from scratch, very much to the point that you were making, Thea, is you've got an opportunity to design for the future versus sort of redesign and course correct. But I think the scale and the impact is going to come from when these big businesses are able to achieve that. So, I mean, any guidance, I don't know if anybody has got a point of view on this, because I think it's a massive one.
Yeah, no, it's exactly that. It's definitely, well, it's easier for a small brand to embed change, but the truth is, you know, for the most part, the practical side of purchasing things that are better for the world, or working with factories that are more sustainable, and all the kind of practical operational side of doing it is really hard as a startup, because you can't buy in the quantities you need to buy of that sustainable packaging. That factory won't work with you because you're too small. So it is hard on that side of things. There was a great initiative where, I don't know if anyone saw it, but Walkers, I think it was end of last year, people started posting their Walkers crisp packets back to Walkers. And it was a massive kind of social media push, and it was kind of, this is the PO box address, just post them back. And the Royal Mail went mad. But the statement was heard, and after that, Walkers came out and said, look, I'm going to change my crisp packets and make them better for the world. That will take a very, very long time, though, and make no bones about it, it will take years and years for that change to really affect the supply chain. You know, same with stupidly, I'm sure you guys saw Iceland with the palm oil thing that just happened in the last couple of months, where Iceland came out and said, we're going to go completely palm oil free in everything we do by the end of the year, end of 2018. Now, that's just not long enough. And so it came out, this big scandal a couple of weeks ago, where they'd just taken palm oil off the packaging, and it was actually still in there, or they'd taken the Iceland name off the packaging, but it was still Iceland. So just really not a good way of doing it. And there's great intentions, but you know, the truth is, when you're a business that large and you're making fundamental changes to your supply chain, much of which affects cost, much of which affects shelf life and other fundamentals about your product, it's going to take several years.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, so often the first step is the desire for the change, and that desire happening at a leadership level. And once you have that desire and that commitment and the willingness to collaborate across your industry, so breaking down that competitive mindset and getting into a collaborative mindset, I think it starts to make a massive difference. So when is Blue Planet 2 Live coming out?
Actually, it is, yeah, end of the month, but nothing to do with me.
Okay. Well, I do actually have a question that I think would be interesting to get your point of view on. In the era of media brands and fake news, are the big media platforms like Netflix, BBC, a help or a hindrance in the sustainability debate?
Well, I think our job is to catalyse the conversation, and we do that in the programs and also in the sort of ancillary digital content we create. So around Blue Planet 2, we had #OurBluePlanet. We made over 700 pieces of content that were there to encourage debate and catalyse that conversation, to keep the conversation up there, to make stuff that's newsworthy, but also to give more information, because a lot of what stops us from getting involved and making these changes, from evolving, is that we just don't know. And if we can share that information and communicate it better, then we do know, and then we're more driven to do something about it. And you know, we're in a place now, it's a sort of life rule, but we have to evolve or die, and we need to evolve.
And then I'm going to do one more, because we are able to do the live performance, right, with mute sound? Okay. I want to make sure we have time for that. So in your industries, what changes have you seen consumers make to adopt more sustainable behaviors? So I don't know if anybody, Marie, if you have a view of that from a research perspective, what you're seeing from a consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember all the numbers right now, but we have a table in our report which lists about 18 different behaviours. You know, to varying degrees, people are, you know, opting in to all kinds of different behaviours. I mean, the ones that are the most evident, I guess, is kind of, you know, starting to refuse things like straws or single-use plastic, or carrying around, you know, you see people carrying around the reusable water bottles. That's becoming much, much more common. Buy-in to recycling is really high. I think, you know, the difficulty is that there's maybe not complete understanding of what can be recycled and why, and I think, you know, there's an issue there that maybe better information could be provided on, you know, a lot of the packaging you see, it has quite industrial symbols on there that are sort of, you know, code between the industry, but actually there's not much there for consumers to tell them what to do, so potentially an issue there. But you know, things like anecdotally, we've heard from lots of brands that we interviewed for the report how there is this sort of grassroots, you know, movement of people coming in and asking questions. So, you know, going into fashion retailers and wanting to know where their stuff is made and what materials they're using and where it's from and how have the people who made this been impacted. Similarly, I think, you know, IKEA have spoke at a conference that I went to, talking about how they've really accelerated all their sustainability initiatives because literally people coming into stores and starting to ask those questions. So I think people are, you know, really starting to shift their behaviours to varying degrees in different areas. But as I said before, you know, the easier and more convenient it is, the more change we'll see.
What do you say? Like consumers, shoppers, everyone is, I've noticed people bringing their own bags and people do have their reusable cups and reusable water bottles, which is great, but I still think the on-the-go industry and the hospitality industry is still so behind or bad, or they're preaching about sustainability and reusing and biodegradable products. But for example, I was at a huge yoga festival last summer and everyone's told to bring their yoga mats and everyone remembers that. But then there's queues and queues for coffees, their food, and there's just no one brings their reusable coffee cup. Then there's free water because someone wants sponsorship. So it's a big coconut water company from Brazil in plastic bottles. Then there's no recycling. And the amount of waste created, and this isn't just one, this is so many events and festivals, and actually, you know, you might be doing your own part day to day, but when these huge festivals and events happen, which are also every weekend all over the country and all over the world now, it's just kind of putting it all back in the bin again. So exactly. Weighing those up, and again, it's coming from the bigger guys at the top to actually make it possible for the consumers and telling them to bring not just their yoga mat, but all the other bits as well.
Exactly. So I can't thank you guys enough. So we are going to, hopefully you guys can stick around for the last sort of performance. So Jay Brave is going to hit the stage, do his infamous performance. But just a quick round of applause for the rest of the panel. Thank you guys so much.
Nice, we've even got music now as well. Shout out Stormzy on this one. Vegan shout out. Yo. Man try to say you gotta eat meat. Tell my man shut up. Anti-vegan tweets? Oh hey rude boy, shut up. Wanna say I'm weak? Shh, shut up. Best in the scene. Yo, couple man wanna say meat is protein. I show them tempeh, now meat is protein. Well, if you're saying that meat is protein, the dog in your house, your girl in my crib, man wanna talk about meat is protein. Big man like me with a beard, I'm a big man like, yo. Seeds on my ledge is what I grow, and Whole Foods is the place I go. Walk in a shop with my cotton bags, get great food, then I go home. Meet new people, namaste, try and live life sustainably. Tell a man I tell like J to the A, there's no wasted, we don't slay. Plants are the best, not being cocky. I got a cup of fresh made coffee. I got friends, I think we should copy. What's their life is still my hobby. Zero waste, athlete body, they get better while the world gets sloppy. And yeah, I mean it, not getting soppy. Better believe it, start getting worried. If you got an MSc, bring it out. Nutritionists wanna jump and shout. You gotta eat meat but ignoring the gout. Stay in your seat, fam, please shut your mouth. But you see my man over there with the sprouts, he'll make a juice for you to try out. All of my man them don't eat foul. Might eat my girl but we don't eat out. Nowadays menus make me pout. Chips and a salad is my only out. Roll in, look, then roll out. I'm so London, I'm so south. Food of my friends when we ain't got now. Need to talk, what's this all about? But we wanna make the world so proud. Like reclaim land, have a friend that's a cow. All of these flat teas falls in a jar. High and Amigas are better by far. Had spare change so I bought new plants. Cold pressed juice that I bought for my ma. When I cook food, it's a walk in the park. Cause I take care when I season the parts. These pricks wanna tell me about myself? Well, you don't even know who you are. Marketing men have got you zoned. Subliminal messages seen through your phone. Little man ting when you think that you're grown. How you gonna eat that meat from a bone? So damn hungry, third world hungry. Kids ain't got no meat on their bones. Animal feed all they needing to grow. Brains getting washed and receding control. I'm a big fan of the grocery store. A man upset that it's grossing me more. And yeah, I got gas when I notice my core. Why? Cause I never got noticed before. Duh, all of you carnies sound so bitter. Trolls on Facebook, memes on Twitter. Can't hold your tongue, can't hold your liquor. More to say, but look, if you don't hear this, shame on you. If you don't share this, shame on you. Can I get a viral hit with this skit? Matter of fact, better make that too. Vegan followers, I need them too. Missionary work with a vegan crew. Shout out Stormzy, bars on the tune. So I had to go so hard on the tune. Check it, don't even talk too much for a talker. Vegan search on my net a porter. Still on my grind like pestle and mortar. CBD oil and coconut water. Break down barriers, break down borders. Man in the kitchen, putting through orders. Raw cocoa, skin clear like water. Smoothing his teeth, start locking up daughters. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm Jay Brave. If anybody's taking some pictures, anything, please follow me at Jay Brave. Tag, hashtag at Jay Brave so I can see it and follow along too. And thank you very much. A bit of humour injected. Thank you.